So Ben, why is Big Ben and Houses of Parliament built in a Gothic design, but not a Gothic age?
Well, I mean, this is one of those things that I find interesting, and I always wonder if it's remotely interesting to anyone else. But so the kind of surface level story is that there was this great big Gothic revival during the Victorian period. You could say 19th century, and Augustus Pugin is who's probably the foremost Victorian Gothic architect. He has this fabulous background where he's designed all sorts, and he came up with these brilliant rules for what makes beauty. And I mean, I was about to say I could talk about that for hours, but I couldn't because I don't know it inside out. But when I read it, I was like, this is extremely convincing. But basically, he was a Catholic, so he couldn't enter into the competition to build the Palace of Westminster and the Clock Tower. But Charles Barry won it, and Charles Barry is always remembered as the man who built Big Ben, or not Big Ben. Big Ben's the name of the bell, of course. But who built the Palace of Westminster? Because before it could be finished, Pugin had this massive breakdown and was committed to an asylum and sadly died. And he's, outside of architectural circles, seems to have been largely forgotten. I mean, I'd never heard of him until I came across this story. And so I thought it would be nice to kind of remember him. But the things I find most interesting about these things is it's not just a story about, some architect who is forgotten. Why I find it interesting is because why the hell is there this building that looks totally different to all the ones around it, built in the Gothic style, which is the style of 11th century France, really? And it's because we get the Enlightenment, and then after the Enlightenment, a certain group of people, many of them in England, many of them poets, they have this kind of repulsion towards the rationality and coldness of the Enlightenment. And so they embrace kind of emotion, nature, they're the romantics. And as part of this, there's this kind of nostalgic backwards look to a simpler time, I guess you might say, or they might say. And that time they land on is medieval England. And what is symbolic of that is Gothic architecture, not the kind of classicism that is so associated with the Enlightenment. And that's why you get this totally out of place Gothic style in Victorian London. And, I find it just because if you were to do that today, I think you'd be accused of a pastiche. And they certainly were. I mean, there were people who said the Palace of Westminster is some hideous pastiche at the time. So, yeah, it's interesting how these things come and go in cycles.
I think John Ruskin wasn't that much of a fan, was he? I think he called it the most effeminate and effectiveless heap of stones ever raised by man. In a classic Ruskin way. Yeah.
Well, I have to say I didn't know that, but I'm absolutely shocked because Ruskin was a big advocate of the Gothic. Like, he absolutely loved all that stuff. He was very much part of that kind of that worship of nature. There's a great episode of Civilization with Kenneth Clark where he just is being very lyrical, talking about Ruskin, and he's articulating this kind of sense of wonder and this kind of identification. I mean, Ruskin literally thought it like there was a moral imperative to embracing the kind of medieval period. He saw it as a time when workmen's skills were more kind of more valid, more appreciated, and there was it wasn't just an aesthetic thing. It was part of a kind of moral outlook. But anyway, that's not to say that what you said isn't true. I have no idea. I'm just surprised by it.
I mean, the confidence in which I said that quote is suddenly shaking under your historical scrutiny. But we can check it out.
He may well have thought, it was a badly done one, which would have been quite justifiable, I guess. Yeah.